Montana Territory, summer of 1881. The sun was dropping behind the Bitterroot Mountains when the music started, and she stood watching from the porch, arms folded tight against her chest. Retta Prescott had no intention of stepping off that porch. Not tonight. Not ever again if she had her way. Out past the split-rail fence, lanterns swayed from wagon posts and tree limbs. The fiddler tuned his bow, and boot heels scraped dust near the barn where the makeshift dance floor had been laid. They were already at it spinning, laughing, skirts flying like petals in the wind. The whole town of Hollow Creek had turned out for the summer gathering. But Retta stayed back, her dress plain, her hair pulled low, her hands too used to work. Her boy, Dawson, was asleep inside, curled up with his sister, Daisy, both of them worn out from the long day. She had not danced in 6 years. Not since the day her husband left and never came back. The sharp creak of the porch step made her turn. A man stood there, tall, dust-streaked, and sun-browned, his hat in his hand and a soft look in his eyes like he had come with something to say but was not sure how to start. "Evening," he said. Retta nodded. "Evening? I saw you up here watching. I was not hiding, if that is what you mean." "No," he said. "Just seemed like you were waiting." "For what?" he smiled. "Me, I hope." She narrowed her eyes, studying him. His shirt was worn but clean, sleeves rolled to his elbows. There was something quiet about him, steady, like a man who did not have to fill the air with talk to prove his worth. "You are new. I came through last month, bought a quarter section west of the creek. Name is Everett Tolley." She studied him a moment longer. "Retta Prescott, I know. Folks told me you have 2 little ones and a backbone stronger than most men." She raised a brow. "Folks talk too much." "They do," he agreed, "but they are not wrong." The fiddle picked up louder now, a waltz. Everett stepped forward, holding out his hand. "May I have this one?" he asked softly. Then, after a beat, added, "And all the rest." Retta stared at him, breath caught halfway to her chest. She had not expected that, had not expected him. Her heart was thudding, but she did not move. "You do not know me." "I know enough," he said. "You stayed when others ran. You work sunup to sundown to raise 2 children on land that fights you every inch, and you still find time to watch the music." She hesitated, then looked out at the dancers. "I buried hope a long time ago." Everett dropped his hand, but his voice stayed gentle. "Then let me dig it back up." Retta looked at him, really looked. His eyes were dark but kind. He did not rush her, did not push, just waited. She glanced back at the door behind her where her children slept, then down at her boots. "I do not know how to waltz," she said quietly. "Neither do I," he grinned. She stepped off the porch. He took her hand, warm and solid, and led her toward the light. They danced slow, awkward at first, her hand on his shoulder, his at her back. She kept her eyes down, heart hammering, but his hand was gentle, his steps easy. And when she finally looked up, his eyes were already on her. "You are not what I expected," she said. "Good," he whispered. That night, after the music faded and the stars came out, Everett walked her back to the porch. She did not invite him in, but she stood close. "Thank you," she murmured, looking out toward the dark fields. "For asking," he nodded. "I meant it. I want all the dances, Retta." She looked at him, long and quiet. "I do not know if I can give them." "Then start with one," he said. "The rest can wait." She watched him as he stepped down from the porch, but before he reached the dirt path, her voice stopped him. "Everett," he turned. "My children," she faltered, then steadied. "They were abandoned once. I will not let it happen again." He nodded, serious now. "Neither will I." Then he tipped his hat and walked into the night. Inside, Retta stood over Dawson and Daisy, brushing hair from their foreheads. Her heart was still beating fast, but not from fear. She had not planned on this. But the cowboy had asked, and something in her had answered. And for the first time in 6 long years, she let herself wonder what it might feel like to say yes again. The next morning came slow and gold-hued, light creeping across the worn floorboards of the Prescott homestead. Retta stood at the basin out back, sleeves rolled, her hands in cold water as she scrubbed Dawson's shirt. The boy had outgrown it, but she meant to pass it down to Daisy come fall. Her fingers worked the fabric while her thoughts drifted far from the washing. She hadn't slept much, not after Everett's words. They had settled into her like seeds in good earth, unwelcome at first, but already rooting before she could stop them. A rustle from the edge of the yard turned her head. Dawson stood barefoot in the grass, rubbing one eye with a fist. "Mama, someone's out front." She dried her hands on her apron, wiping soap-slick fingers down the sides as she stepped around the house. Everett was there, seated on the edge of the wagon bed with a crate beside him. His hat rested on his knee, and he tilted his chin in greeting. "Didn't mean to startle," he said. "Brought something?" Retta slowed. "What would that be?" He stood and stepped aside, revealing the contents of the crate: turnips, onions, a sack of oats, and 3 hens with their legs tied, clucking in protest. "You barter for that?" she asked. "Traded fence posts for the lot. Figured you might be needing." She eyed the offering. "I don't take charity." "Good," he said. "'Cause I wasn't offering any. Thought maybe I'd trade again, supper for supper. You cook, I bring what I can." Her arms crossed without thinking. "And what do you expect in return?" "Company," he said plainly. "Maybe stories if you've got some." She looked past him toward the line of trees near the field. The wind stirred the grass there, and a hawk circled above, sharp and soundless. "I've got more silence than stories." "I don't mind quiet," he said. "It's honest." She studied him. No sales pitch, no flattery, just standing there same as the day before, like he wasn't in a hurry to be anywhere else. "You planning to stay long in Hollow Creek?" "Bought the land permanent." "Plenty of men say that," he nodded. "Plenty of men lie." Retta glanced back toward the house. Daisy had come out now, sitting on the step with a rag doll in her lap, watching with the wide-eyed stillness of a child who'd learned early how to measure grown-ups. Everett followed her gaze. "She looks like you." "She's fiercer," Retta said, a corner of her mouth tilting slightly. He didn't reply, only looked back at the crate. "I'll leave this here unless you'd rather I didn't." She walked up to it, crouched, and checked the oats with her fingers. "Clean, dry." She nodded once. "You bring feed for the hens," he smiled. "Figured I'd trade fence posts for that next." She stood. "Then I suppose supper's at 7. He gave a small bow. "I'll be back by then." She watched him go, the crate still between them, the morning brightening around her. That evening, she lit the stove with Daisy balanced on her hip, Dawson setting plates at the table. The hens clucked softly from the yard, adjusting to their new pen. At 7 sharp, Everett returned with kindling under one arm. He knocked at the doorframe, hat in hand, cleaner than he'd been that morning. Retta let him in. The meal was stew onions and turnips, thickened with cornmeal and a pinch of salt. They ate without ceremony. Everett passed the bread. Daisy offered him a piece of her apple. Dawson asked if he'd ever seen a bear before. "Once," Everett said. "Big as a wagon and twice as mean. Did you shoot it?" "No, let it pass. Sometimes it's smarter not to fire." Dawson nodded like that made sense. After the children were put to bed, Retta poured 2 tin cups of coffee and sat across from Everett at the scarred kitchen table. "You have family?" she asked. "A sister in Missouri, we write. She's got 5 boys and a good husband. You never married?" "No," she met his eyes. "Why not?" He turned the cup in his hand. "Didn't meet the right person," she leaned back. "And you think maybe now you have?" "I think maybe I'm ready to stop wandering." The fire crackled low in the hearth. Outside, coyotes howled far off toward the ridge. "You're not what I expected," she said. "I get that," he replied. She stood, took his empty cup, and carried it to the basin. "You can come again," she said without turning. "If you bring the feed." He chuckled, quiet and low. "I'll be here." When she turned back, he was already standing, hat in hand, the lantern behind him casting his shadow long across the wall. He didn't ask for anything more. Just touched the brim of his hat and stepped out into the night. And Retta, alone now in the hush of the house, found herself listening for the sound of his boots on the path long after they'd faded. By the 3rd supper, Everett brought flour wrapped in a dishcloth and a pair of river trout, freshly caught and gutted, their silver skins still damp. Retta met him at the gate with a nod, not quite a smile, but something near it. The children had already dragged a bench out beneath the cottonwood, and the table was set there, in the shade where the evening took longer to warm. He helped her skin the fish, his knife quick and sure, and when she asked where he learned to clean them so clean through the spine, he said, My ma. She could gut one faster than most men could light a fire. Retta arched an eyebrow. And was she the one who taught you to knead bread too? He glanced toward the dough rising in the cast iron bowl. No, that was the widow who ran the post at Eagle Bend. I worked her stables one summer. She got tired of me ruining her biscuits. Retta scraped the bones into a tin pail. Sounds like she had grit. She did, he said, but not the kind that made a man feel small. Daisy handed him a spoon and Everett took it with a quiet thank you. He stirred the beans without being asked, and when Dawson brought up the idea of building a raft to float down the creek, Everett didn't laugh. He leaned down and said, "You'll want cedar. It holds better and doesn't crack like pine." That night, the meal passed with less formality. Retta didn't hover near the stove. She sat opposite Everett, sleeves rolled, her hands resting easy on the table. Daisy leaned against her side, half asleep by the time the plates were clean. After the children drifted off, Everett lingered at the porch rail, eyes on the horizon where the last of the sun slid behind the far hills. Retta stood beside him, arms crossed against the breeze. "You ever miss the road?" she asked. He didn't answer right off. "Sometimes. When the wind picks up a certain way, feels like it's calling, but the road's just emptier the longer you ride it." She nodded once, then looked out across her land. "You plan to plant anything?" "Already turned 2 rows, thinking beans, maybe corn if I can get the seed." She tilted her chin. "There's a man in town, Mr. Hollies. He sells seed cheap if you haul his grain sacks each week." "I'll do that," Everett said. "Thanks." A pause stretched between them, the kind that didn't press, just settled quiet and full. "You ever think about building something more permanent?" she asked, voice low. He turned toward her. "You mean a barn?" "No," she said. "I meant something that stays, that doesn't ride off when the wind shifts." His face changed, not startled, just still. "Yes. I think about that more than I used to." She looked down at her boots. "I buried a man once, not by choice, but it left a mark." Everett didn't reach for her, didn't speak over it. He just stood there, the silence wrapping around them both. "I'm not looking for a promise," she said. "But I won't let my children take to someone who doesn't stay." "I wouldn't expect you to," he said. "And I wouldn't let myself be that man." Her hand brushed the porch post, fingers tapping the weathered grain. "You'll need help with the corn rows," she said. "Dawson's strong, but he's still small." "I can bring my hoe come Monday." A thin smile tugged at her mouth. "Bring 2. I'll be working beside you." He tipped his head, the brim of his hat casting a shadow across his cheek. "I'd like that." She didn't say anything more, but she didn't move away either. The stars were coming out and the air smelled of earth and wood smoke. When he finally stepped off the porch, he paused halfway to the gate. "Retta," she looked up. "I meant what I said about the dances." "Still do." She didn't answer, but her eyes didn't leave his. He touched the brim of his hat and walked into the dark, same steady pace as always. Retta stayed on the porch long after, the wood beneath her bare feet still warm from the day. She didn't try to name what was growing inside her. But she knew it wasn't fear. Not this time. The first frost came early that year, dusting the pasture grass in pale white and sending the scent of wood smoke into every corner of Hollow Creek. Retta stood at the stove, lifting the kettle just as Daisy's footsteps came pattering down the stairs. The child's woolen socks were mismatched and her braids hung uneven, but she was grinning wide. "Mr. Tolley's wagon's coming," she said. Retta didn't glance up. "Then go fetch your brother. He'll want to carry the kindling in." She ladled hot grits into tin bowls while Daisy dashed out, the door swinging shut behind her. Everett had been coming every few days now, sometimes with worn tools, sometimes with seed sacks or fresh cut boards, but always with a reason that didn't require much explaining. It had been over a month since the dance. He arrived that morning with a small wooden box tucked beneath one arm. He set it on the table without ceremony, brushing the dust from the lid. "What's this?" Retta asked, brows low. "Was at the dry goods in town yesterday. Fella said it came in with the mail orders. Thought of you." She opened the lid slowly. Inside lay a pair of garden shears, the handles bound in smooth leather and the blades narrow as her pinky finger. Not made for fields or fence lines for flowers. Retta looked up without touching them. I've no time for bouquets. I didn't figure you did, Everett said. But there's that patch of wild roses near the creek, and I thought maybe you'd want to trim some for the windows. She studied him for a long breath. Then, without a word, she closed the lid. They spent the day mending the south fence. Dawson held the nails while Everett drove them in. Retta followed behind, tugging the wire taut. The wind cut sharp across the open land, but the sun held enough strength to keep the soil from freezing. When they paused for water, Everett leaned against the post and looked out over the field. "Do you ever think of leaving all this behind?" "I did," she said. "But it was only a thought. There's nowhere else I'd fit." He didn't press, just nodded slow. Later, while the children dozed in the hay shed, she handed him a mug and sat with him on the porch. The sky was streaked orange, the kind of color that made the air feel deeper. Everett turned the mug in his hands, then said, "I've been thinking of building a smokehouse, not just for me, for you too if you want it." She glanced at him. "Why? Because you'll need dried meat come winter. And I've got hands enough to help build it." She let that settle. "You always offer things," she said, "but you don't ask for much." He looked at her then, full and steady. "I'm asking now. I'd like to court you, Retta, not in passing, not just over supper, I mean proper. With the end of it being a life." She didn't blink. "You're sure?" "I've never been more." She looked out at the land. The prairie had turned gold again, the way it always did in late fall, like it was remembering something old and quiet. "I'd need time," she said. "You can have as much as you want." She turned back to him. "Then yes, you can court me." A stillness fell between them, but it wasn't the kind that asked for more words. He reached out and took her hand, just the fingers. His were calloused and warm. She didn't pull away. That night, after he'd gone and the stars were rising, she stood at the window with the shears in her hand. Then she stepped outside, walked to the edge of the field, and cut 3 wild rose hips from the bramble near the fence line. She set them in a chipped jar on the kitchen table, where the morning light would find them. And when Daisy asked the next day why there were flowers in the house, Retta only said, "Because someone brought the proper shears." The wind carried the scent of dried sage and cold soil as Retta drove the last fence staple into place, her gloves stiff with use. The pasture had held through the frost, and the cattle Everett had helped her barter for last week were grazing low along the ridge, their breath ghosting in the air. She straightened slowly, her back aching from the day's work, and saw Everett riding up the trail from the west, his gelding steady beneath him. He dismounted before reaching the house and led the horse the rest of the way, reins looped in one hand. "You're late," she said, reaching for the water gourd tied to the fence post. "I stopped by the mill," he replied. "Got word the lumber's ready." She wiped her brow with her sleeve. "You're still planning to build?" "I've already drawn the frame," he said. "Smokehouse first, then a shed. Maybe a place for storing grain." She leaned on the post. "That's more than you'll need for yourself." "I know." She didn't answer. Instead, she watched as Daisy came running from the house, apron flapping, a ribbon trailing from her hand. Everett knelt without prompting, tying it gently into her hair while Dawson followed at a quieter pace, holding a folded square of paper. Dawson handed it to Retta. "Teacher says I'm ready for longer books." She traced the edge of the paper, the boy's name printed careful as he could manage. "Then I'll ask Mrs. Carver if she has any she's willing to lend." Everett stood, brushing his knees. "I can build shelves in the loft for books and such." When the children ran off toward the shed, she turned to him. "You've been carving yourself into this place one task at a time. You've let me. I've been watching." He took a step closer. "And what have you seen?" She met his gaze. "That you don't expect anything to be handed. That you show up, even when there's no reason beyond the day itself." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded cloth bundle. "I wanted to ask you something, but I figured it had to be done right." She unfolded the cloth slowly. Inside lay a brooch carved from whitetail antler, shaped into a wild rose just beginning to open. The pin was fixed with a small brass catch. "I can't afford silver," he said, "but I carved that myself. Took me near a week of evenings." Her fingers tightened around the brooch. "You asking me to wear this as a promise?" "I'm asking if you'll marry me, Retta." Not because I need a house or a cook or someone to share land with, but because I've stood beside you every day now and I've never wanted to stand anywhere else." She didn't speak right away. The wind stirred the pine tops and a raven passed overhead, silent against the pale sky. "You'll take the children as yours?" she asked. "I already do. You'll stay no matter how long the winters or how stubborn I get, I'll stay." She reached out and pinned the brooch to her collar, fingers sure. "Then yes." He let out a breath and stepped forward, pulling her into his arms, one hand resting against her back, the other in her hair. She didn't flinch. She didn't hold back. When she kissed him, it was slow and certain, like she'd been waiting for that moment since the day she stepped off the porch. They married on a cold morning in early December, with the peaks dusted white and dry grass crunching beneath their boots. Mrs. Carver lent them her parlor, and Everett wore a stiff-collared shirt Retta had ironed herself. Dawson stood tall beside him, holding the ring Everett had bought with his last stack of cut lumber. Daisy scattered pine needles instead of petals, her ribbon tied straight this time. Afterward, Retta served stew from the same pot she'd used for years, but the table was different now. Everett sat at one end, Dawson at the other, Daisy curled in the crook of her mother's arm. That night, as they lay in the loft Everett had built with his own hands, Retta pressed her cheek to his shoulder. "I never thought I'd find ease again," she said. "You didn't find it," he murmured. "You made it." She traced the line of his jaw. "You helped." He kissed her temple, slow and warm. "We'll keep helping each other." Spring came soft and early the next year. The smokehouse stood square behind the barn, and shelves lined the loft wall, filled with borrowed books and a few Everett had brought back from the trader in Missoula. The garden rose sprouted strong, and Dawson took to reading aloud in the evenings while Daisy learned to sew beside her mother. Retta kept the brooch pinned to her shawl every Sunday. And each night, after the lantern was doused and the wind whispered across the fields, she lay beside Everett in the quiet house they'd made together, her heart steady at last.